education while working 2 jobs, only to have her call me a loser at a family dinner. She was shocked when I stopped paying her rent and told everyone why she could no longer afford her lifestyle. When my younger sister Lauren got into her dream college, everyone in the family acted like it was the greatest accomplishment of all time. My parents were beaming with pride. Lauren was already talking about the career she was going to have, and I was standing in the corner quietly calculating how it was all going to work out. My parents didn't have the money to pay for her education. They made that clear when they started dropping hints in family conversations. Lauren is so smart, but college is so expensive these days, my mother would say, looking at me as if I didn't already know where this was going. I didn't have much. I was working as a mechanic and trying to save up for a house. But Lauren was my sister, and I figured, what's the harm in helping? So I pitched in. At first it was small things, her textbooks, some groceries. But it didn't stop there. Soon I was paying her rent, her utilities, even her nights out when she needed to de-stress. Every time she asked for money, it came with an excuse. I'll pay you back when I graduate. Or, Mom and Dad just can't help right now. What made it worse was that my parents acted as if I was obligated to help. Family takes care of family, they'd say, as if I wasn't already breaking my back working 2 jobs to keep them afloat. Lauren, meanwhile, acted like the world revolved around her. She'd post pictures of fancy dinners and weekend trips, smiling as if she wasn't living on my dime. I kept telling myself this was temporary. Once she graduates, it'll all be worth it, I thought. But deep down, I was starting to resent the fact that my life was on hold while hers was moving full steam ahead and I was footing the bill. I thought things would get better once Lauren settled into her college routine. I imagined she'd realize how much I was doing for her and show some gratitude. But if anything, her entitlement only grew. The first real sign was her spending habits. While I was skipping meals and working late shifts to pay her rent, Lauren was flaunting her new wardrobe on social media. Designer handbags, trendy shoes, fancy dinners, things I could never afford for myself. At first, I tried to rationalize. Maybe she got a part-time job, or maybe she was just overdoing it for appearances. But when I asked her about it, she shrugged it off. Everyone at school dresses like that, she said. I don't want to look like I don't fit in. It wasn't just her attitude about money, it was everything. She treated me like a walking ATM, never asking how I was or if I needed help. My parents weren't any better. Every time I tried to talk about how much I was struggling, they'd guilt me into keeping quiet. She's your sister, my mother would say. She's building a future. You should be proud to help her. But it wasn't just helping, it was sacrificing. My weekends were gone. My savings were gone. And that house I'd always dreamed of? Forget it. Meanwhile, Lauren couldn't even be bothered to send a thank you note. Instead, she called to complain about her professors, her workload, or her roommates. She never once asked how I managed to juggle 2 jobs just to keep her afloat. The resentment I'd buried began to bubble to the surface. I was tired of being treated like my life didn't matter as long as hers was moving forward. The turning point came when Lauren casually mentioned that she was thinking about studying abroad for a semester. She didn't even ask me if I could afford it, she just assumed I could handle it. I think it would be such a great experience, she said over the phone, her tone light and carefree. The program costs a little more, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, right? I sat there gripping the phone, trying to process what she just said. I could barely keep up with her regular expenses, and now she wanted me to pay for a semester abroad? When I brought it up with my parents, hoping they'd finally come to their senses, they doubled down. This is an incredible opportunity, my mom said. You'll figure it out, you always do. I was floored. No acknowledgement of how hard I was working, no concern for my welfare, just the expectation that I'd keep sacrificing because, apparently, that was my role in the family. At the same time, Lauren's behavior became impossible to ignore. She'd call to complain about the most trivial things, like how her roommate borrowed her shoes or how the campus cafeteria didn't have any real lattes. She also began to make subtle jabs at me. She'd laugh about how I was always working, and joke that I was married to my job. She doesn't appreciate you, a coworker said one night when I was venting during a break. You bend over backwards, and she acts like you owe her. For the first time, I began to wonder if they were right. Family dinner was supposed to be a casual get-together. My parents invited me over to catch up, and Lauren was back in town for a break from school. I didn't want to go, but I figured I could stand a few hours. When I arrived, the atmosphere was already tense. My parents were fussing over Lauren, asking about her classes, her social life, and if she needed anything else for school. I sat quietly, waiting for anyone to ask how I was doing. But of course, that never happened. Halfway through dinner, Lauren started talking about the study abroad program again. She went on and on about how amazing it would be and how everyone she knew was doing it. She looked right at me and said, "I hope you're ready for a little extra work, big brother. These programs don't come cheap." I froze. I couldn't believe she had the audacity to say that in front of everyone, like it was a done deal. "Maybe you should get a part-time job," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Lauren laughed. "Me? A part-time job? That's funny. I'm too busy with school." That was it. The last straw. I put down my fork and stared at her. "You're joking, right? You think I'm just going to keep funding your lifestyle forever while you sit around doing nothing?" The room fell silent. My parents looked at me as if I'd just sworn at the dinner table. Lauren's jaw dropped, but she quickly recovered. "What's your problem?" she snapped. "You've always been so bitter. Just because your life isn't going anywhere doesn't mean you have to take it out on me." That hit me like a punch in the gut. After all I'd done for her, sacrificing my time, my money, my dreams, this was how she saw me? A failure? Her words hung in the air like a slap in the face. I could feel my blood boiling, but I wasn't going to let her have the last word. "Bitter?" I said, leaning forward. "You think I'm bitter because my life isn't going anywhere? Lauren, my life isn't going anywhere because I was too busy funding yours." My parents immediately jumped to her defense. "That's inappropriate," my mom said, her voice sharp. "You're her brother. It's your job to support her." "My job?" I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. "When did it become my job to work 2 jobs so she could live in luxury? When did it become my job to sacrifice my entire future so she can have hers handed to her on a silver platter?" Lauren folded her arms and rolled her eyes. "Oh, there it is," she muttered. "The martyr routine. That was it. I was done." "You know what?" I said, standing up. "Go ahead and call me a failure, Lauren. But at least I worked for everything I have." "What have you done?" "Nothing. You sit around spending my money while you pretend you're better than me." I turned to my parents. "And you two are no better. You've enabled their selfishness at every turn, and I'm done playing along. I'm not paying for anything anymore. Not her rent, not her tuition, nothing." The silence was deafening. Lauren's face went pale, and for the first time she looked genuinely shocked. "You can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "How am I supposed to live?" "Figure it out," I said, grabbing my jacket. "I've been doing it for years. Maybe it's time for you to learn." I left that dinner feeling a mixture of anger and relief. For the first time, I'd stood up for myself, but I knew the fallout was coming. Sure enough, it didn't take long. The next morning, my phone exploded with texts and calls. First it was Lauren. She began with passive-aggressive messages. "Thanks for ruining dinner. Hope you feel good about leaving your own sister out to dry." When I didn't respond, the guilt trips began. "You're really going to leave me like this? After all I've been through?" I ignored every message. If she wanted to play the victim, she could do it without me. Then my parents got involved. My mom called first, her tone dripping with disappointment. "I don't know what's gotten into you," she said. "Lauren needs your help. She's your sister. She's been my financial responsibility for years." I shot back. "It's time for her to grow up and take care of herself." My father was no better. He called later that day and said, "You're being selfish. You're punishing her for no reason. What's she going to do now?" "Get a job," I said bluntly. "Like the rest of us." The real kicker came later that week when I got a call from Lauren's landlord. Apparently, she told him that I was the one who paid her rent, and when the payment didn't go through, he came straight to me. "She's not my problem anymore," I told him. "You need to talk to her." That conversation must have been a wake-up call for Lauren, because a few days later she showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked disheveled and panicked, a far cry from the confident, entitled person I was used to seeing. "You can't just cut me off," she said as soon as I opened the door. "Yes, I can," I replied, leaning against the doorframe. Lauren stood there, shifting from foot to foot like a child caught in a lie. She wasn't used to hearing, no, from me or anyone else, for that matter. "You don't understand," she began, her voice rising with desperation. "If you don't help me, I'm going to lose my apartment. I can't just move back home. Mom and Dad don't have room for me." "Not my problem," I said flatly. Her jaw dropped. "Not your problem? You're my brother. And for years I've been more than that," I replied, stepping forward. "I've been your safety net, your bank, your excuse to avoid growing up. I worked 2 jobs so you could live your dream, and the one time I asked for respect, you call me a failure. So no, Lauren, it's not my problem anymore." She blinked as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I didn't mean it like that," she stammered. "I was upset and I just wasn't thinking." "You never think," I shot back. "You never think of anyone but yourself. You use me, you use Mom and Dad, and now you're panicking because you finally have to face the consequences." Then she started to cry, big dramatic sobs that might have worked on someone else. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. "You're not going to guilt me into changing my mind," I said. "You need to figure this out for yourself. Get a job, budget your money, do whatever it takes, but leave me out of it." She didn't like that answer. "You're being cruel," she snapped, wiping away her tears. "You're supposed to help the family. That's what family does." "No," I said, my voice firm. "Family supports each other. They don't take advantage of each other and call it love. And until you figure that out, don't bother coming back here." I closed the door, cutting off the excuse she was about to make. For the first time, I felt in control of my life again. After closing the door on Lauren, I braced myself for the fallout. She wasn't the type to suffer in silence, and I knew she tried to turn this into a sob story for our parents. Sure enough, they called me the next day, furious. Mom started with the usual guilt trip. "How could you do this to your sister?" she demanded. "She's struggling, and you left her when she needed you the most." I didn't hold back. "Struggling? She's been living off my paycheck for years while acting like she's the queen of the world. Maybe it's time she learned what struggling actually looks like." Dad chimed in next, accusing me of being heartless and ungrateful for all they'd done for me. This part made me laugh. "Ungrateful?" I said. "You're kidding, right? I've been funding Lauren's lifestyle while you two sat back and cheered her on like she was the next big thing. Meanwhile, I've been working my ass off just to keep her comfortable." The more I laid it out, the calmer they became. By the end of the call, they had nothing to say except that I was tearing the family apart. As for Lauren, her meltdown was spectacular. She plastered her social media with vague posts about how some people only care about themselves, and being let down by those closest to you. She even had the audacity to start a GoFundMe page for her rent, claiming she'd been blindsided by an unexpected expense. Her friends commented with faux concern, asking if there was anything they can do to help. But the donations barely trickled in. Apparently, people weren't as eager to support her lifestyle as she'd hoped. Meanwhile, word of the drama spread through the family like wildfire. My aunt called to say she'd heard I was being unreasonable. But after I explained the situation, she quickly changed her tune. "She really expected you to keep paying her rent?" she asked in disbelief. "Welcome to my world," I replied. After my parents showed up at my door, I realized just how far this whole situation had gone. It wasn't just Lauren's entitlement anymore, it was the entire family enabling her, treating her problems as if they were mine to solve. They didn't stop at guilt. My mother began to spread the narrative that I had failed Lauren and the family. I heard from cousins and relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly chiming in with messages like, "It's not fair to let her struggle," or "Family comes first." But as the days passed, Lauren's facade of control began to crack. I heard from mutual friends that she had moved back in with my parents after being evicted. Of course, that wasn't enough for her. She made it clear that she expected to be coddled there, too. One friend told me she'd overheard Lauren complaining about the food at home. She's mad that her parents don't cook her real meals. My friend said, laughing. She even joked that they should hire someone to take care of her since you're not around to do it anymore. Hearing this only cemented my decision to cut ties. If my family wanted to enable her behavior, that was their choice. But I wasn't going to keep burning myself out for someone who couldn't even show basic gratitude. Lauren's downward spiral continued. She moved back in with my parents, who coddled her like a helpless child. They enabled her every whim, using what little savings they had left to support her lifestyle. Meanwhile, they doubled down on blaming me for her situation, acting as if I'd committed some heinous crime by cutting her off. I heard from relatives that Lauren was still spreading lies about me, telling anyone who would listen that I had abandoned her during a difficult time. She conveniently left out the part where she'd been leeching off me for years while flaunting her privilege like it was her birthright. But her downfall wasn't just financial, it was social. Word of her GoFundMe scam spread, and the same friends who once joined her for fancy dinners now avoided her phone calls. Without me picking up the tab, she had nothing to offer them. The tipping point came when my parents called me in a panic. Apparently, Lauren had run up a credit card debt in their name, maxing out the limit to finance a shopping spree. They begged me to help, claiming they couldn't make the payments on their own. I couldn't help but laugh. After all they'd done defending them, enabling them, vilifying me, they had the audacity to come crawling back. "This is your mess to clean up," I told them firmly. "You chose to support her, you chose to ignore her behavior, and now you're dealing with the consequences." For once, they didn't argue. Maybe they finally realized that I wasn't going to swoop in and save her like I had so many times before. That was the last I heard from either of them. I moved on with my life, focusing on building my future without their constant drama weighing me down. It took years to repair the damage they'd done, but I came out stronger for it. As for Lauren, the last I heard, she was still living with my parents, stuck in the same cycle of entitlement and excuses. Part of me felt sorry for them stuck with their selfishness, but mostly I felt relieved. They had made their bed, and now they could lie in it.